The blue light of early morning seeped through the thin curtains in the small apartment on the outskirts of Glasgow. Naisha Abiola slowly opened her eyes and reached out to the empty half of the bed in a familiar motion. 5 years had passed, and she still sometimes forgot that Lemuel was gone. She forced herself up, though her joints were aching after yesterday's shift. At 38, her body was already reminding her that her years of cleaning at the law firm of Montgomery, Bricks and Associates hadn't gone to waste. Washing her face quickly with cold water, Naisha headed for the kitchen. The tiny kitchen, with peeling paint on the walls, was sparsely furnished, but Naisha kept it spotlessly clean. Cleanliness was her profession, her salvation, and her way of controlling something in this life. As she brewed the cheap tea, she looked at the only picture on the fridge, her and Lemuel smiling against the backdrop of Lake Michigan 2 weeks before the accident. Lemuel Abiola, her husband, who had died at the age of 43. Tall, with a wide, white-toothed smile and eyes in which sparkles always danced. "I'm the luckiest man married to the most beautiful woman in America," he'd often said. Naisha knew it wasn't true. No cleaning lady with calloused hands and early wrinkles could be the most beautiful. But she loved the way Lemuel made her feel special. Memories came flooding back against her will. How Lemuel had waited for her after work one evening, leaning against a pole with a bouquet of wildflowers. "Hey, beautiful, can you tell me how to find the way to your heart?" She laughed at the banality of the phrase then, but something in his eyes made her stop. 3 months later, they were married. Quickly, without further ado, in the presence of a few friends. Naisha had no family. She'd grown up in Chicago's foster care system, and Lemuel said his parents had died, leaving him with only a younger brother who couldn't make it to the wedding. Naisha took a sip of her tea, coming back to reality. Time to get ready for work. Pulling on her worn uniform, she froze in front of the mirror. In the morning light, her dark skin seemed dull and her eyes looked tired. "Were you happy with him?" She suddenly asked her reflection. The question made her wince. Why was she thinking it now, 5 years later? Maybe because of that strange dream where Lemuel stood at their bedside and whispered, "Honey, I need those papers." It reminded her of her husband's real requests. "Naisha, you're my smart girl. Can you look at what documents the lawyers are throwing out? Just wondering what kind of cases they're working on." Or, "Honey, do you remember what those lawyers were talking about when you cleaned the meeting room today?" She hadn't paid much attention to it then. Lemuel said he wanted to start his own business and needed to understand how successful people worked. His questions had seemed innocent. But now, years later, they caused a strange sense of unease. The drive to work took half an hour. Bus, then walk through the park, past pretty houses she'd never be able to afford. Glasgow was one of those many suburbs in America where a clear line separated the decent neighborhoods from those where people like her lived. The law firm's office occupied 3 floors of a glass building in the business center. By 8 o'clock, Naisha was standing at the office entrance, ready to get to work. "Good morning, Ms. Abiola," the security guard nodded, habitually checking her pass. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce," she smiled. They had exchanged thousands of such greetings in 5 years, but never a real conversation. Putting on her gloves and grabbing a cart of cleaning supplies, Naisha began her usual rounds. First the corridors, then the restrooms, the reception area, the meeting rooms. Her movements were honed by years of practice, her hands working almost independently of her thoughts. By the time she reached the office of Mr. Montgomery, the firm's general partner, it was nearly 10 o'clock. Usually the office was full of people at this time, but today was Columbus Day, and most of the staff had taken the day off. Mr. Montgomery, however, was the kind of boss who showed up at the office even on Christmas Day. But today his desk was empty. Naisha was gingerly wiping down the heavy oak desk when she noticed a drawer ajar. Normally, she didn't look into clients' personal belongings, but something made her stop. Inside was a folder labeled Tafari Case, Confidential. Tafari. Why did that name sound familiar to her? Naisha gingerly pulled the folder aside to wipe off the dust and froze. Underneath the folder was a photograph. The man in it looked uncannily like Lemuel. The same eyes, the same smile, but The hair was shorter and the clothes were more expensive than Lemuel had ever worn, and the signature on the back, Kweku Tafari, 2020th year. 2020th, 1 year after Lemuel's death. Naisha's heart raced, her hands trembled. That's impossible. Her husband had been killed in a car accident. She'd identified the body, though it was badly damaged. She buried him. Suddenly, Naisha heard voices in the hallway. Quickly putting the photograph back in its place and closing the drawer, she grabbed a rag and pretended to wipe down the bookshelves. Mr. Montgomery entered the office, accompanied by a young black woman in a strict suit. Naisha recognized her, Desiree Tambo, a newly hired lawyer specializing in fraud cases. She was one of the few black employees at the firm and a source of quiet pride to Naisha. I understand your concerns, Mr. Montgomery, but this identity fraud scheme affects at least 3 of our clients, Desiree said without noticing Naisha. If we don't report it to the police, we can't risk the firm's reputation, Montgomery said. Do an internal investigation. We have a leak and I want to know who's involved. They continued their conversation, lowering their voices, and then left the office. Naisha stood with her hand pressed to her chest. Information leak, identity fraud, a picture of a man who looked like her husband, but with a different name, and the date, a year after his supposed death. The rest of the day passed like a blur. Naisha mechanically performed her duties, but her thoughts were far away. When all the staff had dispersed, she returned to Mr. Montgomery's office. The door was locked. Of course it was. Naisha pressed her forehead against the cold wood. What was she even going to do? Steal confidential documents? It would drive her crazy. But she needed to know the truth. If this Kweku Tafari was really her husband, if Lemuel was alive, it meant the last 5 years of her life had been built on lies. The next day, Naisha arrived at work an hour earlier than usual. She hoped to see Desiree Tambo again. The plan was simple and perhaps foolish. Ask directly about the Tafari case. To her surprise, Desiree was indeed in the office, sitting in her tiny office at the end of the hallway, piled high with folders. "Excuse me," Naisha said quietly, standing in the doorway. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Desiree looked up. At 35, she looked younger with her slim figure and lively eyes, but the wrinkle between her eyebrows gave away that she was used to solving complex problems. "Yes, of course. She hesitated for a moment. "Are you one of our employees?" "I'm Naisha Abiola. I've been cleaning here for 8 years, Naisha replied, accustomed to people not noticing the cleaners. "What can I do for you?" Desiree pointed to the chair across from her. Naisha sat down, clasping her hands together nervously. "This may seem strange. Yesterday I overheard you talking to Mr. Montgomery about identity fraud. I saw a picture, a man named Kweku Tafari." Desiree tensed up. "Were you looking at confidential material?" "No, not on purpose. I was just dusting and I saw—" Naisha took a deep breath. "This man looks a lot like my husband, who died 5 years ago, but the photograph is dated the 20th year. Desiree scrutinized Naisha's face. "Your husband, what was his name?" Lemuel Abiola." Desiree opened her laptop and quickly typed something. "Do you have a picture of him?" Naisha pulled a shabby wallet out of her pocket and took out the only photo she always carried with her. Desiree took it, scrutinized it, then turned the laptop so that Naisha could see the screen. Was that him? On the screen was Kweku Tafari, smiling in front of an expensive car. "Yes," Naisha whispered. "That's Lemuel, but how? He's dead." Desiree leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Abiola, what I am about to tell you must remain between us. Kweku Tafari is one of the suspects in the identity fraud case. He used our firm's client information to create fake credit cards and obtain loans. We also suspect he's involved in a scheme to resell prescription drugs." "But that's impossible." Naisha shook her head. "Lemuel was killed in a car accident on Highway 80. I recognized the body." "Are you sure it was him?" Naisha opened her mouth to object, but suddenly remembered that day at the morgue. The body was badly damaged. The face was almost unrecognizable. She recognized him by the mole on his neck and the tattoo on his forearm. But what if— "Yeah, I thought I was sure. The body was, in bad shape." Desiree tapped her finger on the table thoughtfully. Mrs. Abiola, I have reason to believe that the man you knew as Lemuel Abiola may have used many names in our materials. There are references to Kamisi Oyo, Jabari Sands, Ebenezer Rodney, and Kweku Tafari, all with strikingly similar photographs. And all of them either died or disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Naisha felt the room begin to spin. This was too much. Are you saying that my husband was a fraud? That he faked his death? I can't say for sure, Desiree answered cautiously, but I would like to ask you a few questions. Did your husband ever inquire about your work here? Did he ask you to bring any documents? Inquired about the firm's clients? Memories came flooding back. Lemuel asking to just look at discarded papers. Lemuel asking about conversations she'd heard. Lemuel, who always knew when important business would be discussed in the office. Yes, she answered quietly. All the time. Desiree nodded as if she had expected that answer. Mrs. Abiola, I'm handling this case unofficially. Mr. Montgomery wants to handle it quietly, but I believe we're dealing with a serious crime. If you're willing to help. I want the truth, Naisha said firmly. If Lemuel is alive, if he's been lying to me all these years, I need to know. Then we need to start by checking all his connections. Desiree opened a file on her computer. Our files mention a woman named Iman Koromo. She appears in documents about suspicious prescriptions that we believe were part of Tafari's scheme. She may know something important. Naisha stared at the screen where the woman's name and address appeared. Iman Koromo, a nurse at Riverdale Psychiatric Hospital. Another link to a past that, as it turned out, she didn't know at all. When can we talk to her? When can we talk to her? She asked, feeling her resolve growing inside her to find out the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. I'm free after 6, Desiree said, writing down the address on a piece of paper. I'll meet you outside the clinic. Naisha nodded, accepting the note with trembling fingers. The first step to the truth had been taken, and there was no turning back. Riverdale Psychiatric Clinic was a 3-story red brick building surrounded by a high fence. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the parking lot in front of it was nearly empty, and Naisha easily spotted Desiree standing at the entrance in a trench coat slung over her shoulders. The fall wind ruffled her short hair. You came after all, Desiree's voice sounded approving. Ready? Naisha nodded, though her insides clenched with fear. She'd spent the last few hours going over every moment of her life with Lemuel, trying to figure out how she could have been so blind. How many more lies lurked behind his smile? And most importantly, was he ever truly dead? How do we get inside? She asked, looking at the guard at the entrance. I signed in as a potential customer, Desiree replied, and you are my concerned sister. We need to hold out long enough to find Iman Koromo. They walked past the guard, showing the fake documents Desiree had gotten during the day. Inside, the clinic looked like a normal hospital. White walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the muffled echo of footsteps in the long corridors. The nurse's station should be on the 2nd floor, Desiree whispered, and they headed for the stairs. On the 2nd floor, they came across a young nurse who was filling out some forms behind a counter. Excuse me, Desiree addressed her. We're looking for Iman Koromo. We were told she works in this ward. The nurse looked up. Ms. Koromo finishes at 7. She's in the East Wing right now dispensing medication, but visitors aren't allowed in there. We'll wait for her here if we can, Desiree smiled. She's an old friend of the family. The nurse shrugged and went back to her papers. Naisha and Desiree settled into a small waiting room overlooking the hallway. Do you think she'll talk to us? Naisha asked. If she knows anything about Lemuel, she won't be happy to see us, Desiree said. Be prepared for her to deny everything. They waited for nearly an hour. Finally, a tall woman in a medical uniform appeared in the corridor. Her hair was gathered into a neat bun, and her face had a look of professional courtesy. The name tag read, I Koromo. Desiree stood up. Minus Ms. Koromo? May I see you for a moment? Iman stopped, giving them a wary look. Do I know you? My name is Desiree Tambo. I'm a lawyer, and this is Naisha Abiola. We need to talk to you about Jabari Sands. At the mention of that name, Iman's face changed. For a moment, there was a flicker of fear in her eyes, which she immediately hid behind a mask of indifference. I don't know him, Sorry, my shift is over, I'm in a hurry. She tried to go around them, but Desiree got in her way. Minus Ms. Koromo, this is important. We know you were involved with a man who used that name, a man who may be involved in a series of frauds. Are you with the police? Iman asked, looking around nervously. No, Naisha intervened, stepping forward. I'm his wife. Well, I used to be, until I buried him 5 years ago. Iman froze, studying Naisha's face. Something in her gaze changed, a mixture of recognition and compassion. Not here, she finally said. Meet me at the Bluebird Cafe 2 blocks away in 20 minutes. With those words, she walked briskly toward the exit without looking back. The Bluebird Cafe was a small place with shabby couches and dim lighting, the perfect place for conversations that weren't meant for other people's ears. Iman was already waiting for them at a table in the far corner, a cup of coffee in front of her that she hadn't touched. I knew this would happen one day, she said as Naisha and Desiree sat down across from her. Someone would come to ask questions. I just didn't think it would be another wife. So you really knew Jabari Sands then? Desiree asked. Iman grinned bitterly. Did I? I was married to him for 2 years before he was killed in a construction accident. She looked directly at Naisha. When was that? 7 years ago. 2 years before he met you, I believe. Naisha felt a lump come up to her throat. Was it the same man? Lemuel Abiola? Iman pulled a shabby photo out of her purse and placed it on the table. In it, Iman stood next to a man Naisha recognized without a doubt. Lemuel, only with a different haircut and wearing glasses she'd never seen before. To me, he was Jabari Sands, the building contractor, a charming, attentive man who I thought really loved me. What happened? Naisha asked quietly. Iman was silent for a while, as if gathering her thoughts. I was working at St. Mary's at the time. Jabari was very interested in my work in the oncology department, especially in how prescriptions for powerful painkillers were written. At first I thought he was just curious. She paused. Then the prescription forms started disappearing, first 1 or 2, then more. When the drugs started disappearing from the cabinets, an internal investigation began. He was using you to get access to the drugs, Desiree stated. I didn't realize it right away. But one night I came home earlier than usual and found him on the computer. He was forging prescriptions, using the names of real patients. Iman clenched her fists. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Said he had a small business of reselling drugs to people who needed them, but couldn't get them officially. Claimed he was doing a good deed. And you believed him? Naisha asked. Iman shook her head. Ilayen, I said I'd tell the police. We had a terrible fight. The next day he wasn't home when I came home from work. A week later I got a call saying there'd been an accident at the construction site. By the time I got there, the body had been taken away. Convenient, isn't it? The body was so disfigured that an open casket was impossible. I buried him, mourned, and 6 months later I found out the truth. How? Desiree asked. A woman came to me. She introduced herself as Londimbeki. She said that her husband, Kamisi Oyu, looked a lot like the man in the picture I showed at the wake. She showed me her pictures and it was him, Jabari, only with a different name. Naisha felt a chill run down her spine. So he did this regularly? Married under different names? He didn't just marry, Desiree interjected. He chose women with certain access, a nurse for prescription drugs, a janitor at a law firm for access to confidential client information. What was Londi's job? She was a clerk at a bank, Iman replied. She said Kamisi was very interested in money transfer procedures and how large transactions were handled. What happened to him in her version? Naisha asked. Drowned while fishing. The body was supposedly swept away by the current. Iman shook her head. After I met Londi, I started looking for information. I found another woman, Bamidele Osei, to her. He was Ebenezer Rodney, who worked for an insurance company. Used her to get information on clients and policies. Died as a result of a domestic fire. The body, again, badly burned. Jesus, Naisha whispered. How many of us were there? As far as we know, 5, Desiree replied. You, Iman, Londi Bamidele, and a woman called Falami Nkosi who worked in social services. How did you know about Falami? Iman asked, raising an eyebrow. Her name came up in our files on the identity fraud case, Desiree replied. We suspect that he accessed information about people in difficult situations through her. Perfect victims for insurance and credit card fraud. That makes sense. Iman nodded. Londi and Bamidele and I were trying to figure out how it all worked. Jabari, or whatever his real name is, had created an entire network. Stolen identities from law firms and social services, fake prescriptions through the hospital, accessing financial information through the bank, manipulation of insurance policies. She shook her head. A perfect scheme. But why get married? Naisha asked. Why not just, I don't know, seduce and use? Marriage gives you more opportunities, Desiree explained. Spouses have access to each other's finances. They can act on each other's behalf in many situations, plus it gives the appearance of stability and security. And then, Iman added, it's easier to disappear. A wife won't run to the police to report her husband missing if she's sure he's dead. Naisha sat stunned by all this information. The man she had loved, married, mourned for 5 years had turned out to be a con man who had used her in his schemes. All this time she's been loyal to the ghost. But if he faked all those deaths, she said slowly, where is he now? Is he really dead or… The last thing we know, Desiree replied, is that he used the name Kweku Tafari until a year ago. But then the trail goes cold. He had a brother, Nisha suddenly remembered, Akintunde. He never came to visit us, but Lemuel talked to him on the phone sometimes. At least I thought it was his brother. Iman and Desiree looked at each other. Akintunde Oluwaseun? Iman asked. Jabari had mentioned a brother by that name too. He said he lived in Nigeria. Lemuel said the same thing. Naisha nodded. But I've never seen him. I can check that name in our databases, Desiree said, pulling out her phone. She dialed the number and stepped back to the window, speaking in a low voice. Nisha and Iman were left alone at the table, avoiding looking into each other's eyes. What can you say to a woman who shared a bed with your husband years before you, who was cheated on just as much as you were? Did you love him? Nisha finally asked. Iman looked up, a mixture of pain and anger in her eyes. Yes, and hated herself for it when she found out the truth. She was silent for a moment. Did you? I thought I did, Nisha replied. Now I don't know. Was it ever him? Or was it always just a role he played? I wonder if anyone knew the real person behind all those masks, Iman said thoughtfully. Desiree returned to the table, her face tense. I have information about Akintunde Oluwaseun. He exists. What's more, he lives here in America. He owns a small computer firm in Chicago. Computers, Iman muttered. Of course, perfect for a hacker working with personal data. My contact at the FBI says they've been watching him for a long time but can't prove anything, Desiree continued. They suspect he's connected to a series of cyber frauds, but they have no direct evidence. Do you think he was Lemuel's accomplice? Naisha asked. More than likely, Desiree nodded. He was probably the technical brains of the operation while She stammered. Lemuel, or whatever his name really was the face of the scheme. And if Akintunde is still active, Iman began. Then he might know where Lemuel is now, Nisha finished. Or what happened to him. We need to talk to him, Desiree said firmly. My contact has the address of his office in Chicago. We can be there tomorrow morning if we leave now. Now? Naisha interjected. I have a shift tomorrow. Naisha, Iman said softly. This is about a man who used you, who ruined a part of your life. Is work more important? Naisha thought for a moment. For the first time in 5 years, she felt something other than the dull pain of loss and the routine of everyday life. Anger, determination, a desire to know the truth. You're right, she nodded. Let's go. They left the cafe and headed for Desiree's car, parked across the street. Naisha suddenly noticed the dark sedan parked at the curb start its engine as they passed. I think we're being followed, she said quietly. Desiree discreetly looked back. A black sedan? I noticed it outside the clinic. Stay close to me and don't show we suspect anything. They got into Desiree's car. The dark sedan was still there, but the engine was still running. What now? Naisha asked. Now we'll find out if he's really following us. Desiree started the car and started it abruptly. The sedan immediately pulled away from the curb and followed them. "It's not a coincidence," Iman said tensely from the back seat. "Someone doesn't want us to get to Akintunda." "Or it's Akintunda himself," Desiree suggested, turning sharply into a side street. "Hold on." The next 20 minutes became a chase through the evening city. Desiree darted through the streets, trying to get away from her pursuer, but the sedan followed hard, keeping its distance. "He's a professional." Desiree gritted her teeth. "We'll have to use a backup plan." She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number, keeping her eyes on the road. "Malik, it's me. Remember when you said I could reach out if I needed help?" The time had come. She quickly explained the situation. "Okay, we'll be there in 15 minutes. "Who's Malik?" Naisha asked. "An old friend, ex-cop. He's got a garage on the edge of town. It'll be safe there." Malik's garage turned out to be a sprawling complex with a workshop and living quarters upstairs. By the time they got there, they'd still managed to pull away from their pursuer, though Desiree wasn't sure it wasn't a ruse. Malik, a heavy-set man with a graying beard, met them at the entrance. "Glad you made it," he said, ushering them inside. "Better get the car boxed up, just in case." Once they were safely inside, Desiree introduced everyone to each other and briefly explained the situation. "So you've stirred up a hornet's nest," Malik said. "No wonder you're being watched. That Akintunda of yours must have known you were digging for him." "But how did he know?" Naisha asked. "We just started the investigation today. Maybe he has sources in the police or the FBI," Desiree suggested. "Or—" She stopped suddenly and looked at their things spread out on the table. Phones, bags. "Check your things," she said sharply. "Now." They started going through the contents of their bags and pockets. Malik had brought a special scanner that checked for electronic devices. "Here it is," he said as the scanner beeped over Iman's purse. "You've got a bug in there." Iman turned pale. I didn't. Malik carefully pulled a small device about the size of a button out of her purse. "Professional work. Someone planted it when you didn't notice." "The clinic," Iman said quietly. "I left the bag in my locker during my shift." "So they've known about us for days," Desiree stated grimly. "And now they know we're headed for Akintunda." "Not anymore," Malik crushed the bug with his heel. "But we have to be careful. If they're that professional, they won't just give up." "I think I saw someone going through my stuff at work a couple days ago," Naisha suddenly remembered. "I thought it was the other cleaning lady looking for something, but—" "They've been watching you all," Malik nodded. "The question is, who? Akintunde? Or someone else?" "There's only one way to find out," Desiree said firmly. "We need to find Akintunda and get him talking. My contact at the FBI has information about his hideout," she continued. "In addition to his official office, he has an apartment in an old industrial neighborhood. That's where he spends most of his time." "Sounds dangerous," Malik remarked. "If this guy is as cunning as you say, his lair will be well protected." "We have an advantage," Desiree said. "He doesn't know we've discovered the bug. He thinks he can still track us." "We can use that," Iman agreed. "Pretend we're going to Chicago and we'll pay a visit to his secret hideout," Naisha finished, feeling the adrenaline pulsing through her veins. Malik frowned. "It's risky. I'm with you." "We shouldn't involve you in this," Desiree objected. "Too late. I'm already involved," he cut him off. "I have weapons and experience. You will need it if Akintunda is not alone." The plan was simple. Malik would take them to Akintunda's hideout under the cover of night. They would reconnoiter and then decide how to proceed. The address led them to a half-abandoned building in an industrial zone. Most of the windows were dark, but there was a light on the third floor. "This must be it," Desiree whispered, as they parked in the shadow of a neighboring building. "How do we get inside?" Naisha asked. "There's a back door," Malik answered, studying the building through binoculars. "And a fire escape. But first we have to make sure it's really him, and that he's alone." They waited patiently, watching the lighted window. Finally, the silhouette of a man glimmered behind the curtain. "It's him," Naisha whispered, though it was impossible to see his face from this distance. "I can feel it. Let's hope you're right," Malik said, "because we have to go." They crossed the vacant lot carefully and approached the building from the rear. A rusty fire escape led upstairs. Malik gestured that he would go first. Desiree followed him, then Iman, with Naisha trailing behind. Once they reached the third floor, they found themselves on a small landing in front of a window. From inside came the muffled sound of a computer running and someone's footsteps. Malik drew his gun and nodded to Desiree. She peered cautiously through the gap between the curtains and then quickly pulled back with a nod of confirmation. "He's in there," she said breathlessly. "Alone." Malik gestured to a door at the end of the landing. The plan was simple. Go through the door, take Akintunda by surprise, and make him talk. Naisha's heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed to be heard throughout the building. She suddenly realized that in a few minutes she could know the truth about the man she thought was her husband, about the life she thought was hers. A truth that could prove far more terrifying than all her fears. Malik gently turned the doorknob. It yielded without a sound. They stepped inside, into a dim hallway that led to a lighted room. From there came the quiet clicking of a keyboard. Akintunde Oluwaseun, Lemuel's brother, and perhaps the key to unraveling this whole story, was only a few steps away from them. Akintunde Oluwaseun sat in front of 6 monitors, his fingers running across the keyboard at a staggering speed. He was younger than Naisha had imagined, a slender man of about 37, with a neatly trimmed beard and thin dreadlocks gathered into a ponytail. Unlike Lemuel, he didn't have the same appealing charisma, but there was something about his features that suggested a kinship. Malik was the first to burst into the room, holding a gun in front of him. "Don't move! Hands where I can see them!" Akintund stiffened, slowly raised his hands and turned in his chair. There was no surprise in his eyes, only the cold calculation of a man assessing the situation. "I knew you would find me," he said with a slight accent. "I just didn't think it would be so soon." Desiree and Iman followed, and Naisha froze in the doorway, staring at the man who could be the key to unlocking her past. "Did you know we were looking for you?" Desiree asked, keeping a safe distance. Akintunda grinned. "Of course. I track any mention of the names my brother used. When his 3 widows started dating, it activated my security protocols." "You're the one who's been following us?" Iman asked. "Planted the bug in my bag?" "I prefer to work remotely," Akintunda replied. "Physical surveillance is not my domain. But yes, I hired someone." "Where is Lemuel?" Naisha finally spoke, taking a step forward. "Is he alive?" Akintunda looked at her with some interest for the first time. "Nisha Abiola, the last wife." He shook his head. "Lemuel said you were special, that he really liked you." "Don't lie to me," Nisha hissed. "I was just another pawn in your scheme. Access to the law firm's client data, right?" "It was part of the plan, yes," Akintunda admitted. "But he said it was different with you. Maybe he was just getting sentimental as he got older." "Where is he?" Naisha repeated. Akintunda looked away. Something in his face changed. "My brother is dead," he said quietly. "For real this time." There was silence. Naisha felt a strange desolation. She hated Lemuel for the lies, for the way he'd used her, but part of her still hoped for an explanation, some version of the truth that wouldn't completely destroy her memories. "I don't believe it," Desiree said. "He faked his death at least 4 times. Why should we believe it's real the 5th time?" "Because I saw the body this time," Akintunda replied sharply. "I was the one who identified it. I was the one who buried him. For real." There was a genuine pain in his voice that made everyone wary. "Tell us," Malik demanded, still holding him at gunpoint. "The whole truth." Akintunda took a deep breath. "First, put your weapons down. I'm not going anywhere, and I have nothing to lose." Malik glanced at Desiree, then reluctantly lowered his gun, though he didn't put it away completely. "Speak." "Our real names are Akintunda and Olabode Oluwaseun," he began. "We are really brothers, originally from Nigeria. We came to America 20 years ago. Olabode, Lemuel, as you know him, has always been charismatic. Had a way of making people believe him, trust him. I was a techie, a hacker." He rubbed his face with his palms, suddenly looking very tired. "At first, we were just trying to survive. Then we started running petty scams. Then Bo, that's what I called my brother, came up with a more elaborate scheme to marry women with access to certain information or resources, use them, then fake your death and move on. I provided technical support, forged documents, hacking, processing stolen data. You talk about your brother like he's a monster, Naisha pointed out. But you've been helping him all this time. I'm not proud of that, Akintunda replied. But he was my brother, the only family I have left. And then we never wanted to hurt anyone physically, only emotionally, Iman said bitterly. Akintunda lowered his head. Like I said, I'm not proud of it. But that was a long time ago. Things changed after he met you. He looked at Naisha. Me? She wondered. Why? He started to change, said he was tired of the constant lying, that he wanted to settle down, start an honest life. Akintunda shook his head. I didn't believe him at first. I thought it was just a phase. But then he started insisting that we should end our schemes, stop everything. And what happened? Desiree asked. The problem was that by then we'd already gone too far. We had partners, people we were working with, people who didn't want Bo out of the business, especially because of his connections in the medical field. Through me, Eamon said quietly. Prescriptions for controlled drugs. Yes, Akintunda nodded. It was the most lucrative part of our scheme, and the most dangerous. Bo wanted to stop, but he was threatened. And then, he fell silent, as if he couldn't bring himself to continue. Then what? Naisha asked insistently. Then there was an accident, Akintunde said. A real accident. Bo had crashed on Highway 80, but something about it always struck me as odd. He was a careful driver, and the car. It felt like something had been done to it. There was a heavy silence in the room. Malik and Desiree looked at each other. Naisha felt a chill run down her spine. You don't think it was an accident? She asked. I'm almost certain, Akintunda replied, but I could never prove it. The police put it down to speeding and bad weather conditions. Naisha noticed that Iman was standing very still, almost out of breath. Her face was frozen in a tense mask, her eyes staring fixedly at Akintunda. When exactly did this happen? Iman asked, her voice sounding strangely detached. April 27th, Akintunda replied. 5 years ago. Iman closed her eyes. 2 weeks before he died, for Naisha. What? Akintunda looked genuinely puzzled. That's impossible. I identified his body myself. Unless, Desiree began slowly, unless the man who died in that accident was your brother. But I saw him, Akintunda insisted. I know my brother. How badly was the body damaged? Desiree asked. Akintunda blanched. A lot. His face was... But he had a tattoo and a mole on his neck. I recognized it. The same marks I recognized him by 2 weeks later, Naisha said quietly. But that's impossible. A man can't die twice. All eyes turned to Iman, who stood leaning against the wall with her eyes closed. Iman? Desiree called out softly. Do you know something about this? Iman slowly opened her eyes. There was a strange glint in them, a mixture of pain, guilt, and relief. It wasn't Lemuel, she said quietly. In the first accident, it was a homeless man, of similar build, with similar marks. Akintunda stood up abruptly, and Malik immediately pointed a gun at him. What do you know? Akintunda roared. What did you do? I killed him, Iman said simply. Your brother, but not in the accident you are thinking of. The room seemed to freeze. No one moved, no one breathed. Explain, Desiree demanded. Iman took a deep breath. After I learned the truth about Jabari, Lemuel, I started following him. Found out about his other personalities, his other wives. Found out he kept using my name to get prescriptions. Prescriptions that could cost me my license, my freedom, everything. She looked around the room, stopping at everyone in the room. You don't understand. I wasn't just risking my career. People were dying from overdoses of the drugs he was getting through me, through my name. I tried to stop him, threatened to go to the police. He just laughed, said he had proof of my complicity that he'd use if I talked. So you decided to kill him, Naisha said quietly. Not right away. Iman shook her head. At first I just wanted to scare him, make him stop. I followed him, found out about his new plans, his new wife. You, Naisha. I realized he'd never stop. And that's when you caused the accident, Malik guessed. Not exactly, Iman replied. First, I staged a fake accident with a homeless man who looked just like him. The man was dying of cancer and agreed to help for money, which I promised to give to his sister. She hesitated. I used my medical knowledge. I made him feel no pain. Then I faked the accident. But why? Akintunda asked. To make Lemuel think everyone thought he was dead, Desiree explained, so that he would let his guard down. Iman nodded. I wanted him to feel what it was like to have your life stolen, your identity erased. I watched him as he watched his own funeral, saw him planning his next step, a new identity, a new life. And then? Naisha asked quietly. And then I found out that he'd already managed to marry you, that he was using you the way he used all of us. And I decided that he would never stop, that the only way to stop was to kill him for real. Iman spoke smoothly, emotionless, like she was telling a story that had happened to someone else. I dosed him with a drug that makes him drowsy. I waited for him to go home to you, Naisha. He always took the same route, the same stretch of highway where the first accident happened. I just, made sure it was real this time. You faked the accident with my brother? Akintunda took a step forward, his eyes burning with rage. I stopped the killer, Iman said firmly. A man whose actions led to the death of several people from overdoses. A man who ruined the lives of 5 women. A man who would never stop. A tense silence hung in the room. Malik gripped his gun tighter, ready to intervene if the situation got out of hand. Why did you confess now? Desiree asked. You could have kept quiet. We would never have known. Iman looked at Naisha. Because she deserves the truth, just like the rest of us. Because I'm tired of living with it. She straightened up. I am ready to be punished for what I did. Akintunda stared at her, his face a mask of pain and anger. You killed my brother. Your brother was a monster, Naisha said quietly. And you helped him, all these years. Akintunda lowered his head. I know, and there is no forgiveness for me. He looked at Iman. Neither do you. What now? Naisha asked, turning to Desiree. Now we go to the police, she replied. All of us. We tell them the truth. The fraud scheme, the fake deaths, the real deaths. I'll go to jail, Iman said without much fear in her voice. But maybe it's for the best. I can't live with this burden anymore. And neither can I, Akintunda added, for my crimes. Malik nodded. I will take you to the station. There is a detective there who will be very interested in this whole story. As they left the building, Naisha lingered beside Iman. Why? She asked quietly. Why didn't you go to the police right away? Why did you take matters into your own hands? Iman looked at her for a long moment. Would you have believed me? A nurse accusing a respected businessman? With his connections? With his charisma? With the fake evidence of my guilt he had prepared? She shook her head. The system doesn't protect people like us, Naisha. It never had. Naisha couldn't find anything to say. Part of her understood Iman, though she could never approve of her actions. At the police station, they spent all night giving their statements. Desiree used her legal knowledge to help Iman, though the outlook was bleak. Murder is murder, whatever the motive. Akintunda cooperated fully, providing all the details of the fraud scheme. It turned out that the scale of their operations was far greater than anyone had suspected. Dozens of victims, millions of dollars. When Naisha finally left the station in the early morning hours, she felt devastated. Lemuel was indeed dead, and had never been the man she loved. Her marriage, her mourning, 5 years of her life. It had all been built on a lie. Are you all right? Desiree asked, meeting her at the exit. Naisha shook her head. I don't. I'm not sure I'll ever be okay after this. It'll take time, Desiree said softly. But you're a strong woman, Naisha. You survived it once. You'll survive it again. What will happen to Iman now? Naisha asked. The trial, Desiree sighed. I'll help with her defense. There are extenuating circumstances. And Akintunda too. He knows a lot. It might help him make a deal. And with me? Naisha asked quietly. What will happen to me? Desiree put a hand on her shoulder. That's up to you. But if you want my opinion, you could help others. People who have fallen victim to similar schemes. Your experience is invaluable." Naisha looked up. "How?" "We're working on a support group for victims of fraud," Desiree explained. "And we need counselors. People who have been through it and can help others. If you're interested." Naisha looked up at the rising sun. A new day, a new beginning. Maybe a way to turn the pain into something useful. "Yes," she said. "I'm interested in that." 6 months later, Naisha stood in front of a group of people in a small conference room at the community center. On the wall behind her was a poster that read, "Fraud Recovery, a support group for victims of fraud. My name is Naisha Abiola," she began. "And for 5 years, I have been mourning a husband who never existed." The faces in front of her were attentive, sympathetic. People who had been through similar ordeals. People seeking healing. "I'm not here to tell you that the pain will go away quickly, or that you'll ever completely forget what happened." She paused. "But I am here to tell you that you are not alone, that there is life after deception, that there is strength to be drawn from this experience." In the months since, Naisha has learned a lot about herself, about her resilience, about her ability to trust again, to trust selectively, cautiously, but to trust. She worked alongside Desiree, helping other victims of fraud. Sometimes she met with Londi and Bamidel, Lemuel's other widows. They found a strange comfort in each other's company. Iman was sentenced to 15 years for second-degree murder. Akintunde got 10 years, but with the possibility of parole for cooperation. Naisha visited them both occasionally, not out of forgiveness, she wasn't sure she could ever fully forgive, but out of a realization that they were all part of the same tragic story. "Our stories don't define us," she continued, turning to the group. "What we do with those stories is what matters. How we use our experiences to grow, how we turn our pain into wisdom." After the meeting, Desiree was waiting for her at the exit. "Great speech," she said with a smile. "You're getting better at it." "Thank you," Naisha replied. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm an imposter, that I have no right to give advice to others when I was so blind myself." "That's exactly why you have the right," Desiree countered. "You've been through it. You know what it's like to be deceived by someone you trusted the most." They went outside. It was a beautiful spring day, the sun shining brightly in a clear sky. "You know," Naisha said thoughtfully, "sometimes I think about what Akintunde said, about how Lemuel wanted to change, wanted to start an honest life. Do you believe that?" Naisha shrugged her shoulders. "I don't. Maybe it's just another lie. Or maybe there really was something human about him, underneath all those layers of deception. I'll never know for sure." "And you can live with that uncertainty?" Naisha thought about it, about a life built on lies, about a love that may never have existed, about 5 years of mourning for a man who may have deserved his fate. "Yes," she finally answered. "I can live with that, because my life right now is the truth. My job, my friends, my way forward. It's all real." Desiree smiled and held out the folder to her. "Then perhaps you might be interested in this. Job offer, full-time counselor in our new program for fraud victims. The foundation has provided funding." Naisha took the folder, feeling hope blossom in her chest. An opportunity to turn her tragedy into something useful, to help others find their way through the darkness to the light. "I'll think about it," she said, though she already knew her answer. They walked together down the street in the spring sunshine. Naisha never looked back again. Her story didn't end the day she buried a husband who never existed. It had continued, and now she was writing each new page herself,